Hi, everyone. It's Terry Bruce, and this is another 10-minute nonprofit evaluation tips. Now, this month, we are talking about outputs versus outcomes versus impact. And within the evaluation ecosystem model, this puts us in the evaluation schema bubble, where we're talking about what do you want to know and why do you want to know it? And that includes, in part, the type of evaluation you're doing and the questions you're asking and how to formulate those questions and how to measure them. Now, I'm sure when you heard this month's topic, outputs versus outcomes versus impact, you probably groaned and you probably have heard this topic a million times and you probably were saying, come on, Terry, this is very basic. We all have a grasp on this. We wanted to get to the good stuff. But the truth is, about 95% of the organizations that I work with around evaluation do not know outputs versus outcomes versus impact. And often they think they're talking about outcomes and they're framing their evaluation in terms of their results that they think they're achieving. And what they're actually sharing as outcomes are either outputs or objectives. Very rarely are they, when they're first starting evaluation, actually talking about outcomes as outcomes. And this happens for a couple different reasons. Oftentimes, organizations hire an outside consultant to come in and do their strategic plan, and the consultant that they hire may not have a good grasp of outcomes versus outputs versus objectives, or the consultant doesn't well understand the organization's business and therefore struggles a little bit about how to frame the results because they don't understand the intended results of the work because they don't have a deep understanding of the organization's mission and goals and what the outcomes of that mission and goals would look like. Now, additionally, there is some nuance beyond the basic descriptors of outputs is volumes of stuff done versus outcomes is the change or results that have happened as a result of the programs and services, and impact is the cumulative effect in the community as a result of the programs or services. Those are very basic definitions. They'll stand you in good stead as good rule of thumb in general, but there are two exceptions to this rule, and there are two instances in which outputs are also outcomes. And that makes this additionally confusing and why often organizations get a little mixed up. Their discussion of what they're measuring and tracking lacks the nuance to help them understand in which instance an output is just an output and when it's actually an outcome and can be used in that way. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the first instance of when an output can be an outcome is it depends on the type of evaluation you're doing. There are actually lots of different types of evaluation, lots of different ways of categorizing evaluation. And you're going to hear in evaluative circles lots of different terminologies slung around, including things like summative and formative evaluation versus needs assessment versus outcome evaluation, process evaluation, etc. Do not get too hung up on the terminology. There's a lot of these classification systems. The two biggest are categorizing evaluation based on when in the program delivery timeline the evaluation is administered. That is your formative versus summative evaluation. Formative evaluations are types of evaluations that are done when you're first formulating the program. So before the program's delivered and it's a gleam in someone's eye and you're sitting down trying to design it, that's going to include formative evaluations, which might be needs assessments, could be environmental scans and SWOT analysis, and things like that that go into the program or service design. Versus summative evaluation is done after the program has been delivered. So you complete a cohort and then you go back and you look at the program and the delivery. And that can include process evaluation, program evaluation, as well as outcome or impact evaluation. So was the program delivered as effectively as it could be? Were there any blockers or hurdles or bureaucracy that could be streamlined? And did the program achieve the desired results? So summative evaluation we often are doing after either a single cohort or a beta test or a pilot test. If we're doing Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, that would be the check point after you've delivered an initial test of your new change or program or service. Additionally, we could group evaluations by the question we're asking. What are we actually looking at? So needs assessment is, does anyone need my program, and who needs it, and how great is the need, and where do we find these people? Process evaluation is about the administration and delivery of programs, and is it streamlined and effective, versus program evaluation is program performance. Did you meet your goal outputs? Like, did you serve the number of people you intended to serve? Did you have the number of expected outcomes? And did, what percentage of people completed the program, and things like that. Outcome and impact evaluation, however, are about results. Did the program achieve the intended results? And then cost benefit analysis. What's the ROI of this program? So those are the different types of evaluation that people might talk about. And this is where an output can be an outcome. So when you say, for instance, we served 120 people with our program, that is an output. And if you're talking about outcome evaluation, did the program achieve its results? The fact that you served 120 people is not even output measuring the outcome, because the outcome would be how many people completed the program and or how many people had the desired change or effect. So we served 120 people is not an outcome. It's just an output when we're talking about outcome evaluation. And in fact, it may not even be the important output. However, if we're talking about program evaluation, did my program perform? One of the things that would answer whether or not your program performed is, how many people did you serve, and how did that relate to the goal? If your goal was to serve 100 people and you served 120, your program outperformed expectations in terms of number of people it could attract to the program and the number of people it could serve. Therefore, then you start getting that the output is an outcome for that internal program evaluation. Additionally, I've mentioned before, one of my pet peeves is when I get fundraising requests or appeals and they talk about the organization's impact, that they raised $21 million and they had 300 volunteers. Those are not outcomes. They're not outcomes. Those are outputs, and they're not even externally focused. They're not focused on results. You're talking about how great we are at staying in business, how sustainable your organization is, at how good it is at raising money and attracting volunteers, but it speaks to nothing about what you did with that money, what you did with those volunteers, or the results of having that money and those volunteers. However, if we're doing an internal, again, program evaluation in terms of measuring the outcomes of our fundraising program. So let's say last year we raised $19 million, and this year we make some internal changes. We start accepting Bitcoin or stock options or Venmo, or we change our online donation form or some other process improvement to our fundraising program. And now we raised an extra $2 million. That $21 million becomes an outcome of those changes, and it's a metric of the effectiveness of those changes. So that output then can be counted as an outcome. Almost always, outputs that can be counted as outcomes depends on the type of evaluation you're doing, but almost always it's internal metrics. When you're trying to use these outputs as external metrics of change as a result of your programs and services, it's almost always an output. When you're using it as a measure of change as a result of an internal process or system change, then it almost always can be an outcome. Those outputs can be outcomes and measures of the effectiveness of those changes. So that's the first instance in which an output actually can be an outcome. However, again, keep in mind that usually those are going to be internally focused and they're not proof of the results of your work and your program and services. So yes, measure them and talk about them as outcomes internally to your staff and your board to measure the effectiveness of your program evaluation and even your process evaluations, but do not attempt to use those as outcome or impact evaluation outcomes, because they are not. They are at best going to be outputs. Now, the second instance in which an output actually could be an outcome for outcome evaluation purposes is in basic safety net programs. So in human services, we have a whole category of programs and services that are considered what they call basic safety net. This would be things like food pantries, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters. So these are programs and services not designed to provide a long-term solution to a societal ill, such as hunger and homelessness, but they're providing emergency respite to the sort of worst of the worst situations to prevent a catastrophic outcome, prevent starvation or death by exposure on the streets. In those cases, because the programs are designed just to ameliorate an immediate need for the very short term, homeless shelters usually are providing a bed for tonight, and they kick you out in the morning and you have to come back and reapply the next day. And if you're not in by curfew, or if it's first come, first serve and you're too late, you may not get a bed even though you had one the previous night. There's sort of no continuity of service there. Food pantries might provide food and groceries for a few days or up to a week, but again, you have to keep coming back. They might run out. You're not guaranteed to receive benefits, and they may not have enough to go around for everybody. So these are short-term solutions to an immediate crisis. In those cases, because there's no long-term outcome or impact intended beyond this many people didn't starve today because they got food from us, or this many people didn't sleep on the street and die of exposure last night because they had a warm, safe place to sleep, your outputs are your outcomes. This is the amount of people we served. This is the amount of people who didn't have the catastrophic outcome because we existed. So the outputs are the outcomes in those instances. Now, if you are using your emergency services to provide a pipeline to longer term care, using people who come into the shelter then get assigned a case manager who tries to help them get long-term housing and additional assistance and wraparound services, then you have additional outcomes. How many people entered case management services, how many stuck with the case management, how many ended up not being homeless anymore because of a result of the case management services, etc. But if you're just doing emergency services, your outputs are your outcomes. Additionally, arts and cultural institutions, often outputs will be outcomes because arts and cultural institutions are designed and ordained by sheer dint of existence to have a public benefit. There's plenty of research that has been done about the public benefit deriving from arts and cultural institutions and how they enrich civic life and make communities a better place to live by the fact that they exist. So therefore, the number of people you serve, the number of people who come to your theater or come to your public music concerts or spoken word exhibitions on the common, in the park or on the green, or the number of people who come to your museum also is your outcome. These are the number of people who received enrichment from our existence. So in that case, you can talk about number served or volume of services provided as an outcome. Those are the only two instances that I know of in which an output is an outcome. Now, certainly, if you know of other instances or ones that I forgot, or you have questions about that, please leave a question in the comments or some feedback for me. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. And beyond that, you need to talk about your outcomes as a result, as results and change and process towards your goal or your vision or your mission, and not just volume. All right, well, that's it for this week. Join me next week where we'll continue the conversation about outputs versus outcomes versus impact. There is still lots more nuance to dig into in this topic. In the meantime, please do like, subscribe, and share the Substack blog post. You can do that at terrybruce.substack.com. All right, thank you and see you next week.